Hello, I'm Dr. Mickey Becker with Move Forward. Today we're going to go into our fourth episode of series on setting boundaries. And what we're going to look at today is consequences. We talked about in the first one, the two main things we're looking at are the boundary and the consequence. Those are the two aspects. When we looked at the boundaries, we were saying you have to be willing to make the change yourself because the other person is not asking for this boundary. The other person is okay with the way things are. You're the one that's not. So it's a question of, are you willing to make the change? Then we looked at, why does this behavior bother you? What is the emotional response you are having? Why does their behavior upset you? Again, we talked about some of them are very clear cut. That this is a dangerous, unhealthy behavior, has to stop. Doesn't matter how it makes me feel, period. It's a dangerous behavior. Then on the other end, it's just, this is an annoyance for me, and I don't like how it is because I'm annoyed by it. But we need to know that before we step in, because we have to learn how do we manage our own emotions before we try and tell other people how to change. That we can't just use having other people change as the solution to our emotions. Then, in the most recent episode, we talked about identifying what the actual behavior is that needs to change. Being able to narrow it down so that it's a very clear description that the other person can very clearly identify and change that behavior, and we can clearly identify whether or not that behavior has changed. And that's where we get today, which is consequences. Now, when I say consequences, what I mean is if the behavior doesn't change, so the other person's behavior, if it doesn't change, then what are you going to do? That's the consequence. It's they have a choice of do they want to change, and then you have a choice of how to respond if they do not change or if they do not follow that boundary. So when we say consequence, you can't think of it as what's the way they are going to suffer. You have to think of it as what is the change in my life that I am willing to take. So, for example, parents. I hear from a lot of parents, I have trouble setting boundaries with my kids because they'll throw a fit. They'll say they hate me. They'll do whatever. And so I tend to give. The moment the kid throws a fit, I give. That is you saying, I am not willing to suffer the discomfort of my kid throwing a fit. It's you. It's not on them. You said don't. They did it. And then you said, you know what? I'd rather you go ahead and keep doing that thing than me have to be uncomfortable because you're upset. Which is often what we're looking at when we set a boundary. Someone else has a behavior that works for them. It just doesn't work for us. We set a boundary, they cross it, we say enough is enough, then they throw a fit, and we back off because we feel uncomfortable with them being upset. We feel uncomfortable with how they now feel. Another way that the consequence can be something we don't want to enact is sometimes the consequence is separation. Sometimes the consequence is, in-laws, if you don't stop talking trash about my ex, that's a terrible analogy, so I'm going to stop with that one before I try and make it work. Anyways, it's if you don't stop doing this behavior, grandparents, stop acting this way around the grandkids. Or the boundary is the grandkids don't get to spend time with you anymore. All right, sounds nice, because if you threaten them with not getting to see the grandkids, then hopefully they'll change. That's what your mind is thinking there, is that if I force something onto them they don't want, then they will change. But do you really want to stop letting your kids hang out with their grandparents? Is that really where you want to go? Again, we're looking at the consequence. The consequence is what are you willing to do? Because You don't necessarily want your kids to never see their grandparents again. So are you going to say that is the consequence and then uphold it? Because now you are taking an action that you don't want to take. Again, it's a challenge, and with my clients is a common misconception. It's, I'm going to come up with a consequence that the other person won't like. If I come up with a consequence that's enough, they won't like it. It will force them to change because they won't want this consequence. But that consequence, you may not want it. You may not like that result. Boss, if you don't stop acting this way towards me, then I am going to quit. Okay, I just threw out this threat of I will quit with the goal that it will change your behavior because you don't want me to quit. But I also don't want to quit. So now I've put myself in a spot of, if they don't change, am I willing to enact a consequence that I probably really don't want? And that's your biggest challenge. When I work with clients, the biggest challenge is looking at, am I willing to hold the boundary? Because that may require me to enact a consequence I don't want. If you don't stop, I will leave. Okay, either I am really going to leave, which may not be something I want to do, or you can just keep doing what you want to do and I am never going to enact that consequence. So when we're looking at consequences, it's not to say every consequence has to be this dramatic, horrible thing, but it's looking at, are you willing to hold the consequence you're about to set? It's also looking at, when you make those consequences, just like you wanted to clearly identify what the behavior was, you want to clearly identify the consequence. So if you don't stop this behavior, I'm going to stop hanging out with you. Okay? Forever? For a week? For 6 months? Only during the daytime? Only at night? Only when we're around other people? Very vague. So, same thing as when you were clearly identifying what the behavior was, you want to clearly identify the consequence. If you don't stop whatever behavior it would be, then for the next 6 weeks, we are not going to hang out. Then we can talk again and we can see, where do we go from there? When we talk again, I have the same boundary. But for the next 6 weeks, this is the consequence. Think of it as when parents are grounding their kids. It's, you don't get your phone for the next 6 months. Oh, okay. Now we know. This is not forever. This is for a certain period of time, and then we will reevaluate. So, consequence. I know this is a longer episode, but that's what we're looking at. We're looking at, be very clear. What is the consequence? How long will it last? And be very clear, are you ready to enact that consequence? Because it may be something you don't want to have to do. Do you want to end the relationship? Do you want to listen to the other person be upset at you? Because that may be the consequence. The consequence is you're not going to hang out. So now the other person's going to get upset. They're going to talk trash about you to all of your other friends. And now all your other friends are going to point this out to you. That's not going to be fun. The result is not something you are going to enjoy. But in order to hold the boundary, you have to be willing to experience this thing that you don't want. That it can't just be, I'm going to put out a consequence hoping it will scare you. It's if I'm going to put out that consequence, I need to be ready to hold that consequence, to enact that consequence, even if I am not happy about it. Again, I'm Dr. Mickey Becker with Mood Forward. Thank you for watching the series here on boundaries. Like I say, we're looking at the boundary and the consequence. Those are your two key things. What is the clear boundary? What consequence are you going to enact? And these things are about you. They're not about scaring the other person into change so that you feel better. They're about you evaluating how are you going to manage your emotions in a situation that's uncomfortable, and what's the boundary you're going to set, and what's the consequence you are going to enact. Thank you for watching so far. Again, Dr. Mickey Becker with Mood Forward.